Let's be honest, when your phone lit up with the words "breaking Iran unleashes fury on Israel," your heart skipped a beat. Not because it was shocking, no, because deep down you knew this moment was coming. The tension, the violations, the silence, the hypocrisy. It was all building, all festering under the surface like a volcano. And now it's erupted. But here's the real question nobody is asking. What does this mean for you? Because this isn't just about Iran or Israel. This isn't just about rockets, drones, or war rooms. This is about a global tipping point. And you, me, the entire world, we're standing right on the edge of it. You see, when history books talk about turning points, they don't just mean governments, politicians, or borders. They mean people. People who chose to wake up, to speak up, and to rise up. So turn on and listen. So I'm not here to break the news. I'm here to break the silence. Because what we just witnessed isn't random retaliation. It's a message. A message to occupiers, to world powers, and yes, to the sleeping Ummah. It's a slap in the face to global double standards, a rejection of decades of oppression disguised as diplomacy, and a reminder that no nation, no matter how powerful, is untouchable. And let's get this straight. If you think this is just another headline, if you think this doesn't affect your life, your future, your choices, you're dead wrong. This moment is bigger than politics. It's bigger than borders. It's a spiritual alarm clock for a world that has hit snooze for far too long. So today, I'm not just going to tell you what happened. I'm going to unpack why it matters, what it exposes, and what comes next. Not just for nations, but for you. And why I say this, not just for nations, but for you, because history isn't just written by armies. It's shaped by those who refuse to look away. Let's dive in. Iran didn't just launch missiles. It launched a statement that said, we are no longer going to be silent. We are no longer going to absorb the hits. We will respond, and the world will feel it. This isn't just a counterattack. It's a geopolitical earthquake. And if you're still thinking this is just about military operations or battlefield tactics, you're missing the whole point. What just happened is a shift in global power, psychological, political, and spiritual. For years, the Middle East has been caught in an unbalanced power structure. Israel, backed heavily by the US and shielded by silence from the global West, has acted with impunity. Airstrikes in Syria, assassinations in Iran, apartheid policies in Palestine. The world watched, leaders shook hands behind closed doors, and the Ummah was left fractured and disempowered. But now, for the first time in decades, a red line was crossed, and Iran wasn't bluffing when it said there would be consequences. Here's what you need to understand. Power isn't always about who has more weapons, it's about who is willing to use them, when, and why. Iran's response wasn't reactive, it was calculated. It was designed to send a message not only to Israel, but to every nation that has treated Muslim lands like chessboards. It was Iran saying, we are not pawns, we are players, and we're done playing defense. And the world felt it, not just in explosions and air raid sirens, but in boardrooms, in embassies, in financial markets. Suddenly, analysts are scrambling. Alliances are shaking. The illusion of Israel's untouchability has cracked. For the first time, the myth that only one side could strike without retaliation has been shattered. Let's pause here and talk about timing, because timing is everything in geopolitics. Iran didn't act in a vacuum. It acted after months of brutal aggression in Gaza, after the storming of Al-Aqsa, after global protests erupted demanding justice. The timing wasn't impulsive, it was intentional. Iran knew the world stage was set, that the world was watching, and that a response now would have maximum impact. And this wasn't just military, it was psychological warfare. Israel's Iron Dome system is one of the most sophisticated air defense systems in the world. Yet even with all that technology, the message Iran sent was clear. We can reach you. You are not immune. And that message reverberated not just in Tel Aviv, but in Washington, London, Riyadh, and beyond. This is the shift we're talking about. The end of one-way violence, the rise of reciprocal consequence. Iran's move has emboldened other nations, resistance groups, and oppressed populations. It's proof that asymmetric power is no longer asymmetric when you have nothing left to lose and everything to defend. Is not conflicted with fact. It's consistent and complete and holistic and intense. It's revenge and pain. You cannot ignore the fact that the balance of fear has shifted, that a new precedent has been set, that from this day forward, every missile launched in the Middle East will carry not just explosives, but expectations and consequences. So what's next? That depends on what the world does now. Will it double down on silence and hypocrisy? Or will it acknowledge the new reality, one where resistance isn't just a word, it's an equation? Oppression plus silence equals explode. The world just changed. And if you're still waiting for a return to normal, you're not paying attention. When missiles fly and buildings collapse, the world watches. But what's more terrifying than the roar of explosions is the dead silence that follows from the very powers that claim to uphold justice, peace, and international law. Iran unleashed a wave of fury. But listen closely. Can you hear it? That silence from Washington, that awkward pause in London, that calculated quiet in Paris, that eerie muteness is louder than every missile launched. This is the hypocrisy we need to talk about. For years, Israel has acted with almost complete immunity. Airstrikes on Damascus, assassinations in Iran, the slaughter in Gaza, the siege, the starvation, the mass graves, and yet the world barely blinks. No emergency sessions, no sanctions, no mass condemnations. But the moment Iran responds, the moment Iran dares to say enough, suddenly the world is awake, alert, and cautioning against escalation. That silence, that selectivity, that is the real war being fought. A war on truth. We are watching global powers play favorites. We're watching human rights be weaponized and international law be treated like a tool, not of justice, but of control. Iran's counterattack forced the hand of every major world player, and instead of confronting the root of the fire, they're scrambling to shame the smoke. Think about that. Instead of addressing the genocide in Gaza, they're condemning the country that responded to it. It's like watching someone finally push back against a bully and the teacher blaming the one who fought back, not the one who started the fight. This silence tells us everything. It tells us where loyalties lie. It tells us which lives matter in global politics and which ones don't. When Palestinian children die, the world offers concern. When Israeli tanks are hit, suddenly it's a crisis. When Gaza is flattened, the UN delays. When Tel Aviv is targeted, they rush to convene. That's not diplomacy, that's complicity. And let's not pretend it's just about politics. It's about power. The Western world has built its reputation on the illusion of moral high ground. They tell us they stand for peace, for democracy, for freedom. But when injustice screams and they say nothing, what they really stand for becomes painfully clear. Power over principles, order over justice, silence over accountability. Iran's strike exposed that silence in the most brutal way. It ripped off the mask. It forced every global actor to pick a side, not between Iran and Israel, but between truth and convenience, between justice and PR. And most of them, they chose the latter. And that should alarm us more than any weapon ever could, because silence is not passive, it's a choice, a strategy, a weapon, and it kills. It kills trust, it kills hope, and in places like Gaza and Yemen and Iraq, it literally kills people. Every time a nation chooses not to speak, it sends a message. And that message is received by every child under rubble, every mother burying her son, every community watching their history erased. So the next time you hear "we are concerned," ask what they were doing before the concern. Ask why they stayed silent when it mattered most. Because silence, when paired with power, is not just cowardice, it's complicity. Iran's strike broke more than barriers, it broke illusions. And now we can't unsee it. The silence is screaming, and we must not cover our ears. Across the Muslim world, something is shifting. It's in the streets, it's in the mosques, it's in the fire behind people's eyes when they talk about Gaza, when they whisper prayers for Palestine, when they raise their voices against injustice. This moment, this retaliation from Iran, it didn't just hit a military base or a city, it hit something much deeper. The conscience of the Ummah. For the first time in a long time, millions of Muslims are waking up not just to the brutality of oppression, but to the power and potential of unity. But here's the real question: will they stay awake? Because history has shown us something painful. Our emotions can be loud, but our actions are often short-lived. When we see blood on the ground and bodies pulled from the rubble, our hearts ignite. We tweet, we cry, we protest. But then, life happens. The world moves on. The algorithm shifts, and we go back to our routines. That is the cycle the enemy is counting on, that we will care, but not for long enough to matter. But that's the cycle the enemy is counting on, that we will care, but not for long enough to matter. Iran's strike shook that pattern. It didn't just respond to an attack. It challenged every Muslim who has been waiting for someone else to act. It said, "You're not helpless. You're not voiceless. You are part of something greater, and it's time you remembered." That's what this moment is about. It's not just about military strength. It's about the awakening of a spiritual and moral force that has been asleep, lulled into silence by fear, division, and distraction. And let's be real, distraction is one of our biggest enemies. While Gaza burned, much of the Muslim world scrolled through influencer drama, Netflix releases, and fashion trends. While children starved, we debated trivial opinions on social media. But when Iran responded, the smoke cleared. Suddenly we remembered that this ummah was never meant to be a passive observer. It was built to stand, built to lead, built to defend what's sacred. The Quran doesn't call us to be spectators. It calls us to enjoin good and forbid evil, to stand firm for justice, even if it's against ourselves. And that's exactly what we're being called to do right now, not just to support Iran's response, but to support a global awakening that outlives this moment. Because real change isn't born from rage alone. It's born from discipline. And that's what the Ummah needs right now. Discipline in staying informed, in organizing and resisting propaganda, in supporting the oppressed, not just in spirit, but in strategy. Discipline in dua, in boycotts, in using our voices where they count. The kind of discipline that turns emotion into momentum. And we have to remember, we are one body. When one part hurts, the rest cannot be numb. Gaza is not just a place, it is a test. Palestine is not just a cause, it is a mirror. It reflects who we are, how much we care, and what we're willing to do when it's no longer trending. This awakening must become a movement, not for one day, not for one war, but for a future where the Ummah knows its worth, reclaims its voice, and never again waits for someone else to speak first. The question isn't whether we're awake. The question is, will we stay awake long enough to make it count? In today's world, war isn't just fought with bombs, drones, and missiles. It's fought with headlines, hashtags, and half-truths. The battlefield has expanded from the skies and streets to our screens, our minds, and our conversations. And in this new era of warfare, propaganda is not just dangerous, it's deadly. What makes it worse is that most people, don't even realize they're caught in it. They think they're informed, but in reality they're being fed a version of events carefully filtered, edited, and weaponized to shape opinion, not truth. The moment Iran struck back, the Western media machine kicked into full gear. News anchors began using words like aggression, escalation, and terrorism. But where were those words when Gaza was being bombed relentlessly? Where was the outrage when entire families were wiped out in a single night? Where were the bold headlines when journalists were being targeted, when mosques were leveled, and when aid was deliberately blocked? They were silent, or worse, they justified it all under the banner of self-defense. This is how propaganda works. It doesn't always scream lies. Sometimes it just whispers carefully selected facts. It tells you what to think, what to feel, and what to fear. And in the case of Israel and Palestine, or Iran and the West, it paints one side as civil, reasonable, and righteous, and the other as violent, irrational, and extreme. It doesn't matter how many die, how many laws are broken, or how many crimes are committed. If the narrative is controlled, the truth becomes irrelevant. Iran's retaliation was not just an act of war, it was a disruption of narrative. It challenged the world to pay attention to what led to this moment. It forced people to ask, why now? What pushed Iran to this point? And that's the question the media wants to bury. They don't want you to look at the decades of sabotage, the targeted killings, the proxy wars, or the stolen lives in Palestine. They want you to zoom in on the missiles and zoom out on the history. This manipulation isn't just harmful, it's meant to divide people, to make us question each other, to make Muslims question their own people, to frame every act of resistance as terrorism and every act of occupation as defense. And unless we recognize this for what it is, we will continue to fall into the trap, arguing over semantics while lives are lost and justice is delayed. But here's the truth that breaks the propaganda. Facts still matter. Context still matters. And your ability to think critically is your weapon. In a world drowning in manipulated media, the real revolution is refusing to be spoon-fed lies. It's about asking the hard questions. Who's funding what? Who benefits from the chaos? Why are some voices amplified while others are erased? Because if you rely on mainstream media to tell you who the villain is, you'll always end up siding with power, not justice. And let's not pretend this is new. History is filled with examples of occupiers called peacemakers and freedom fighters called terrorists. Nelson Mandela was on a terrorist list until 2008. Malcolm X was labeled dangerous. And now, anyone who stands against Israeli occupation is framed as radical or extremist. Iran didn't just strike a target, it struck a lie that's been repeated so often, many believed it was truth. And now the world is faced with a choice. Continue consuming narratives that comfort the powerful, or begin questioning the stories that keep the oppressed in chains. If we don't fight the propaganda, we're fighting blindly. And that's exactly what those in control want, an uninformed, divided, easily manipulated public. But once you see the manipulation, once you see the script behind the scenes, you can't unsee it. And then you have a responsibility, not just to speak, but to seek, not just to react, but to educate. Because truth in a time of lies is revolutionary. You can fire missiles, drop bombs, and level entire cities, but the one thing you cannot kill is the human spirit. That's what the world doesn't understand about Palestine. That's what occupiers can't seem to comprehend. They've tried everything: siege, starvation, censorship, isolation. They've bombed homes, hospitals, mosques. They've used propaganda, political pressure, and economic sanctions, and still the people of Palestine stand. Still, the voices from Gaza echo louder than ever. Because this isn't just a war on land, it's a war on will. And history has shown us again and again, when a people have nothing left but their dignity, that dignity becomes unbreakable. The Israeli regime has spent decades trying to erase Not just Palestinians, but they've tried to erase their maps, rewrite their stories, and silence their grief. But every time a child carries the keys to a demolished home, every time an elder remembers the trees they planted before exile, every time a mother teaches her children to say Palestine hurrah, Palestine lives. This resilience, this spiritual resistance is more powerful than any weapon, and that's what frightens the oppressor more than rockets. A people who refuse to be erased. Iran's strike in many ways was more than retaliation, it was recognition. Recognition that the resistance of Palestine is not isolated. It is shared, it is supported, it is connected to a wider struggle across the Muslim world and beyond. And what makes this resistance so powerful is that it's not rooted in politics, it's rooted in faith, in conviction, in the belief that oppression, no matter how brutal, cannot outlast truth. Because here's what you need to understand. The Palestinians are not just fighting for themselves. They are carrying the weight of every oppressed nation. They are a mirror of what colonization, apartheid, and global silence can do to a people. And yet, how the human soul still survives it. When we talk about rockets and airstrikes, we're missing the deeper battle. The real battle is psychological. It's cultural. It's the attempt to crush a people's belief in their right to exist, to return, to rebuild. And yet, they continue. Gaza has no army, no air force, no navy, but it has what no superpower can manufacture: resilience. Children walk through rubble with their school bags. Women bury their loved ones and return to the front line of caregiving, teaching, and surviving. Men dig through ruins with bare hands to pull out the living. This isn't just resistance. It's an unshakable faith that justice belongs to the oppressed, even when the world looks away. That's why Palestine continues to inspire people across the globe, from South Africa to South America, from Kashmir to Ferguson, because it reminds us all that even when the odds are impossible, the human soul doesn't surrender. You can exile a people, but you can't exile their memory. You can silence the media, but you can't silence a mother's prayer. You can bomb a home, but you can't bomb the idea that every people has a right to live free. What Iran's response did was remind the world that the Palestinians are not alone. It sent a clear message. Their pain is our pain. Their struggle is our struggle. And their cause is not forgotten. And most importantly, it reminded the Palestinians themselves, those in the camps, under siege, behind walls, that there are still voices that see them, still nations that stand with them. Palestine hasn't been defeated because it never surrendered. And that, more than any weapon, any alliance, or any declaration, is what keeps the resistance alive. You can destroy buildings, you can murder leaders, but you cannot kill a people's right to justice. And until justice is done, Palestine will never be quiet. Because the voice of the oppressed is louder than bombs, and it never dies. The question on everyone's mind now is simple but urgent. What comes next? After Iran's unprecedented strike on Israel, after the silence of the global powers, after the undeniable awakening of the Muslim world, where do we go from here? The answer isn't found in war rooms or press conferences. It's found in the actions of the people. Because what happens next is not just about governments or militaries. It's about whether the momentum sparked by this moment will become a movement that transforms our future. We are standing at a crossroads in history. One path leads to more destruction, retaliation followed by retaliation, countries dragged into war, and civilian lives caught in the crossfire. The other path is far more powerful and far more difficult. Sustained unity, strategic resistance, and long-term empowerment of the Ummah. Iran's strike might have shaken the region, but what will truly change the course of history is whether this moment opens the eyes of a sleeping generation. For too long, the Muslim world has been divided by borders, by politics, by sectarianism, by distractions. Each tragedy feels like a wake-up call, and yet we hit the snooze button. We chant, we post, we protest, and then we forget. But this time has to be different, because this moment has revealed two undeniable truths. First, that resistance is possible, and second, that silence is no longer acceptable. The Muslim world has witnessed strength, not in theory, but in reality. And with that knowledge comes responsibility. Responsibility to build, to educate, to organize. This is not the time for empty slogans or emotional outbursts that burn out after a week. This is the time for strategic thinking, for economic boycotts that actually bite, for media platforms that tell our side of the story, for youth that are not just angry, but equipped with knowledge, with purpose, with vision. We must also recognize that what lies ahead is not easy. The systems that enable oppression are not just going to collapse overnight. They are protected by governments, media, and financial power. But history has never favored the comfortable. It has always favored those who endured, who struggled, and who believed in a better tomorrow even when it looked impossible. And we must be prepared. The propaganda will increase. The labels will be thrown at us. Extremist, radical, uncivilized. But let them label. The truth doesn't need their approval. What matters is that we know who we are. We are the descendants of people who built civilizations, who carried knowledge across continents, who stood for justice when it cost them everything. That legacy is not dead, it's dormant. And now it's being awakened. Iran's strike was a spark, but we are the fire. And that fire must spread, not in violence, but in vision. A vision where Muslim nations stop being pawns on someone else's chessboard. A vision where our resources benefit our people. A vision where our unity terrifies those who thrive on our division. What comes next is up to us. Will we rise from this moment with commitment, with consistency, or will we retreat into apathy until the next tragedy forces us to feel again? The Ummah cannot afford another cycle of emotional outrage followed by spiritual sleep, because the stakes are too high. Gaza is still bleeding. Palestine is still under siege. Yemen is still starving. Kashmir is still locked down. And the entire Muslim world is still under the watchful eye of powers that fear our awakening more than they fear our weapons. So what's next? The answer is simple. We build. We organize. We rise. Not for revenge, but for restoration. Not for chaos, but for justice. Not for power, but for the oppressed. And we do it together, because this time the world saw what happens when the Ummah doesn't flinch. Now it's time to show them what happens when we don't stop. This isn't just a news headline. This isn't just another chapter in the long book of Middle East conflict. This, right now, is a turning point. Iran's response wasn't just about missiles. It was about meaning. It was about drawing a line in the sand, a line that says the days of silence are over. The days of watching children die while leaders shake hands in luxury halls are over. The days of waiting for the world to care are over. Because what we just witnessed is more than a retaliation. It's a call to every Muslim, a call to every human being with a beating heart and a working conscience. The question is no longer what is happening. The question now is, what are we going to do about it? We've walked through 6 powerful realities in this speech. We exposed the silence of the world. We witnessed the courage of Iran. We looked at the awakening of the Ummah, the deception of the media, the resilience of the Palestinians, and the open road ahead. Each one of those is a lesson. Each one is a warning. And each one is an opportunity. You see, history doesn't change because of governments. It changes because people demand it. It changes when the average person decides to stop scrolling and start standing. It changes when young people become informed, when mothers teach resistance with love, when men choose courage over comfort, and when leaders lead from principle, not pressure. Iran's fury may have shaken the skies, but your voice, your will, your action, that's what will shake the future. So don't let this moment pass. Don't let your heart be stirred only to go silent again. Let this be the moment we remember, not for what was lost, but for what was found. Our unity, our dignity, our fire. This is not the end, it's the beginning. And from here forward, the world will no longer ask, will the Ummah wake up? They'll say, They're already awake. And they're not going back to sleep.